Hi, my name is Kana Hammond. I'm the narrative strategist at Asian American Futures, and I'm so excited to be sharing our ANHPI audience research for this Spark Talk today. Asian American Futures was founded in 2020, and we invest in AAPI communities, we build narrative power, and we activate new voices, all in service of building a powerful AAPI majority that's fighting for racial justice in a multiracial democracy. But before I dive into the research, I want you all to rewind back with me to API Heritage Month in May of 2021, where a group of Asian American friends and I had gathered to watch and discuss the PBS Asian American series on Zoom. Now, our discussions exposed some differences because we all knew we needed to be telling different stories about Asian Americans, and this amazing series was just a start. But we couldn't really agree on what those stories should be or how we should tell them. So, one friend deeply felt the pain of the attacks on elders and the murders in Atlanta. They were going to rallies, they were volunteering at self defense workshops, sharing videos on social media, just hoping others would realize that the violence was so real and present. Yet another friend is the descendant of Japanese American incarceration survivors during World War II. Um, they were advocating for cross racial solidarity during this time. And then there was a friend who almost changed their name after 9/11 because being a South Asian person made them feel like a target. And why, they wondered, were people just waking up to anti Asian violence? Now, these differences were surprising based on the ways we typically segment Asian Americans. Obviously, we're not a monolith, but our demographic differences couldn't explain it. We had multiple ethnicities, immigration stories, generations, class backgrounds, faiths, genders represented, but our differences didn't fall on those lines. And I couldn't explain them at the time, but I was really curious and was really heartened to see that we all cared about wanting to show up and wanting to shape a different future for our communities. And it turns out my friends and I were not alone. The more time I spent listening and observing API America, the more I realized that we are at such an important cultural inflection point, and a political and social one too. There's so much hope. Ideas like solidarity, community care, visibility for Native Hawaiian and Pacifica people are finally getting the attention they've long deserved. But beneath the surface, sometimes in really visible ways, we know that harmful narratives have shaped the way our communities are seen and how we see ourselves. So not just mono minority and perpetual foreigner, but deep narratives around assimilation, scarcity. The recent Supreme Court decision on affirmative action was a great example of this. And these ideas hold a lot of power, even if most of us poll liberal or vote for Democrats. And after all of the research we've done, I'm convinced that if we're going to tell different stories about our communities, we need to transform the fear and the scarcity and curiosity our communities feeling right now into a stronger sense of pride, love, and power. And doing so will help us build narrative power. So, if we want news stories to stick, we need to focus on changing the culture in which we're immersed. We want to be in control of the stories told by us, for us, and about us. And nothing changes until the narrative changes. And we know just how transformative narrative power has been for social movements, how Love is Love propelled the marriage equality movement to victory, how Black Lives Matter changed our perceptions of racial justice. Even the term Asian American was actually a narrative invention. It started as an alternative to Oriental and initially spoke to a set of values and ideas rooted in justice and solidarity. And there are a number of API groups beginning to use narrative strategy to advocate for ideas like solidarity, to combat disinformation, or increase a sense of belonging. So we know where we're starting. We know these harmful dominant narratives are out there, but we also know that there's alternatives because activists and visionaries have already begun to see them out in the world. Ideas about solidarity, self determination, community care, pride, belonging. So this framework here is called a narrative system. It offers a destination for our narrative work so that we can really move beyond just shifting a single idea or narrative to, again, changing the culture in which we are immersed. We don't have to just stick to one thing. And we believe that building narrative power starts within our own communities. So not only have our communities internalize harmful dominant narratives, but we just can't wait for somebody else to tell better stories about us if we don't first know what those stories are. And we think that Millennial and Gen Z, Asian Americans, are going to be at the forefront. In so many ways, they already are. But we needed to learn more about them because understanding your audience is just one of the most important components in narrative strategy. And while there's so much research, really more than ever now about Asian American communities, there's so little focus on these generations specifically. And we wanted to close that gap and understand how this generation could help us bring those aspirational narratives to life. So we spoke directly to them. We started with a screener survey, did 28 interviews, and from that, developed 6 different audience personas, which I'll show you in a minute. Our goal wasn't to have a sample that was most scientifically representative, but to make sure that we are hearing from a broad representation of factors that are often less considered. So are we hearing from Southeast Asians? Are we getting gender diversity? Are we getting sexuality diversity? Are we speaking to people with a variety of class backgrounds? And I'll note that we did include Native Hawaiian and Pacifica people in this process, but we're actually kicking off and raise funding to do a separate community-specific NHPI narrative research process, which we're starting now, led by my colleague Alisi Talua, because we want to honor that not all narratives and experiences in the umbrella are perfect overlaps. We are supported by an amazing community of experts in narrative and research and organizing who really helped us shape the research in a way that was useful to the movement. So let's dive in. These are our 6 audience personas, which I mentioned a minute ago. And our goal was not just to learn how to close the gaps between dominant and aspirational narratives, but also to understand who could help us do that. So these 6 personas describe how people relate to being AAPI and to different facets of their identity. And there's a couple ways to look at them. On one hand, we need to recognize that everyone has room to grow and transform. Everyone has a role to play if we're going to get to that majority that we seek. And we also know that not everyone has adopted our aspirational narrative, so some groups just simply have more room to move than others. So let's talk about the people who have a little more room to move. On the left, we have our strivers. These are your Kevin Wens, if you're familiar with that archetype. They aspire to meritocracy and have a real need for security. They really want their hard work to be celebrated. They're super sensitive to feeling like anti-Asian violence isn't getting the attention it deserves, and they tend to be more politically moderate because they don't feel like progressive ideas are quite realistic. They really lean into personal achievement as the thing that will get them ahead and get them the security they are seeking. But they will rally all of their friends. They will use their voices. They'll show up at the next movie screening. They'll support the musician. So we need them to rally and up the energy for AAPI movement work. In the middle, we have compassionate peacekeepers. They aspire to belonging in dominant culture and just want everyone to get along. So they're less progressive on issues, but they know that racism is real. They know that injustice is out there. They just prefer to focus on one-to-one action over larger political or systemic change. So we need them to see both sides, to help bring people into the fold, especially those who might be earlier in their journeys. And this group does tend to skew a bit older, on the older end of millennials, and sometimes they're very connected to their faith. Last, on the right, we have our independent skeptics. this group does tend to be younger and they feel different. They might hold multiple marginalized or just very intersectional identities. A great example of this is I spoke to a queer Muslim woman who said they didn't know people like her existed outside the internet. They tend to be progressive on issues, but they feel really alienated by the AAPI community, especially those drivers. Now, who's already sharing aspirational narratives? On the one hand, we have inclusive optimists. They aspire to pan AAPI inclusion, really see an inherent value in diversity. More is more when it comes to difference, as long as there's good representation. So they'll join the AAPI student group, and they've been on a real journey from shame to pride in their identities and want everyone else to feel that way too. Cultural experimentalists, meanwhile, they're focused on evolution and change. They feel really connected to their heritage, but they're also innovators. So they're leading the mutual aid groups. They're the chefs rebranding Chinese American food to be more positive and celebrated. They're already practicing solidarity. But oftentimes they're doing this because of negative experiences that they've had within their communities or cultures, and they see a distinct need to leave some things behind to meet the moment, whether that means, actually going to therapy or interrogating anti-Blackness. Last but not least, we have rooted in heritage. They're very focused on their own communities. So think Native Hawaiian activists fighting for land, language, and self-governance, the Taiwanese American community organizations preserving identity, language, and heritage, Japanese American orgs like Densho. The challenge is to bring them into the fold while recognizing that they're not always going to have the same opinions or get excited about the same issues. Now, everyone has a seat at the table and a role to play, but cultural experimentalists can model for others what this new aspirational AAPI America looks and feels like. They may just need to be reminded that not everybody is on the same point in their journey. Now, all of our personas have this really rich detail which you can apply to your own work. They've been super helpful for us as we've developed messaging for different issues. So reach out to us if you would like your own copy. Now, cultural experimentalists, they're already so hard at work. And when I ask people to bring in images of what a future AAPI America looked like, these are the images they brought, and these ones are specifically for Asian America. The problem is that, nobody is recognizing this innovation, and our narrative work really has a job to do to reframe this experimentation that you see here, not as a bad Asian version of our parents' culture, but to say this is who we are as Asian Americans, and our experience and our identity is the product of solidarity, of innovation, of sharing the best of our cultures, and knowing when we need to leave some things behind. It's rooted in history here. And narrative investment can really help accelerate that shift. But more shorter term, we've found that our personas and our audience research has really relevant applications to issues that are in the news. We just collaborated with Chinese for Affirmative Action and Xinjiang Project on messaging to move Asian American audiences on affirmative action and education equity. Really, really amazing to see how just putting a persona lens on our content creation really made a difference in what tested well and who we are able to move and reach. So I highly recommend you check out this example. But we think there's tons of other applications as well, and we would love to hear your ideas, your questions, even ideas for collaboration if you think there might be a way for us to work together. So please reach out. My email's at the bottom here. We would love to hear what you're working on and how you think this research could apply to the work that you're doing. Thank you so much, and really excited and look forward to hearing from you.